Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Beefs Media. You'll notice there's no split screen today. This is episode 6, and we're doing another installment of White Sox Wasteland. We're a little past the quarter mark of the season, and you'll notice it's been a few months. Some of that's just life happening, and the luxury of this format is it's here when I want to do it and when I'm able to do it. A big part of it, too, has been the White Sox. We knew they would be bad this year, right? I think I was sort of painting the more optimistic picture of seeing like, well, hey, they could win 70 something games as the sort of rosy analysis, but they were just, as you may recall, so ungodly terrible out of the gate that um, it was like trying to describe a car accident while the accident kept happening over and over again. It was or trying to describe an object falling out of the sky as it was still going. And I think it was easier to sort of wait and let it roll to a stop before trying to do it midway. And so a lot of this episode is going to be generated from notes that I was taking at different times over the last few months, things that I wanted to talk about. And some things have changed. Some of my, and part of the benefit of it is it is a long season, and some of my snap reactions have sort of evened out to being in a better place. But some of the problems that I had written down, in April and earlier in May have persisted or gotten worse. So as we speak, they're still in Toronto. Outcome of Game 1 is not yet decided. They just got swept by the New York Yankees in New York in pretty one-sided fashion, I would say. And so I may quote some numbers that may have shifted over the course of the game, but I don't think anything hugely significant has changed about a lot of these topics I'm gonna bring up. And frankly, this could have kept rolling, and I could have kept waiting as the story kept unfolding. But at a certain point, I figured I would just go for it and stop making the perfect the enemy of the good. And so I wanted to, I guess. I guess it's been better in the last few weeks. They've been 500-ish. They're starting to dip below, but they rallied to get to a place. What were they coming into today? 14-33, which is obviously terrible, but it's not the 3-22 where I was kind of watching it with fascination. And if you'll forgive me as sort of being a bad fan of, I had this almost accelerationist attitude of saying like, well, how many times can they get shut out? I mean, how many games can they lose? I mean, what if they're 3-40? You know, like what happens? What happens if they're 5-50? And for a while, it looked like that might be doable. But these things tend to even out, and then some of these players were better than they were showing, and we've seen that as time has gone on, and it's evened out a bit. But um, it's been terrible. I suppose one of the questions I've been asked, and if you're watching this, you probably already saw me on the Oju with the From the 108 crew a couple weeks ago now. And a lot of these thoughts are continuations of that, duplicative of that. One of the questions I was asked was the sort of Rick Hahn versus Chris Getz. How am I feeling? How would I compare the two at this stage? And it is still really hard to separate these things out. I'm an outsider. I'm not. I can ask some people who are still in the business, still in the league. People who know the organization a little bit. So I have some information, but I wouldn't describe myself as sourced. I think. So with that caveat applied, um, I think it's still really early. It's still really early going. There's some things that I'm going to talk about that I think are signals about possible systemic flaws and failures, even with Chris Getz as a decision maker, not just within the context of, even if we forgive him for the hand he's been dealt by Jerry Reinsdorf, by the rest of the board, you name it. Tony La Russa, for instance, who is evidently still there and heavily involved, which, um, so that's tough to separate out. But there are some things that I think you can start to identify with Getz, but there's other things we're not going to see yet. There's for instance, the Birmingham rotation in AA has been really, really excellent. People have been talking about just results wise. Forget the scouting report. All their ERAs are, like 2.5 or lower. They've been doing a great job. And so maybe that's part of an organizational change of pitching development. Maybe Brian Bannister and Katz being given more free rein, and who knows, any number of other people behind the scenes, technology, philosophy, training. I mean, they've certainly invested a ton into arms, some to the point where I actually started to get worried about it. And I talked about that on the other show. I'll try to link in the description. Where they traded Dylan Cease, and the headline name back was Drew Thorpe, another starting pitcher. They prioritized getting pitchers and catchers back in their sell-off last deadline. Who did that? Unclear. It seems like a lot of these moves are unclear, and I for years have sort of beat up on Hahn pretty as the focal point of a lot of my complaints, and some of that may have been unfair as well. A lot of them may have been Jerry, Tony La Russa, Kenny Williams, Jeremy Haber. There was evidently all kinds of infighting, and there was no one lead decision maker, which may be why it was so incoherent and bad. But he was still the outward-facing person, and frankly, things got the product, the end result, got as bad as it's ever been once Hahn took over. I mean, say what you want about Kenny Williams, but the team certainly won more often than it lost. And even if it was frustrating for them to win 84 games and finish 10 back of the Twins, I think a lot of us would much rather watch an 84 win team than a 120 loss team. Or I think for a while, for like the month of April, they were trending towards like 140 losses. It was truly astonishing, and much more interesting. It was more the Pistons 30 loss streak style of bad than this sort of 450 win percentage streak they've rallied with since then. So with all those qualifiers out of the way, and I could keep listing qualifiers forever. We haven't seen a draft yet. We haven't seen really any major league additions yet. Somewhat understandable given the situation gets inherited, even though the owner said he was hired because he wanted to make them really good really fast. And then Getz came in and was like, what was it? Reinsdorf said like, well, he knows everything top to bottom, so he doesn't need time. We won't lose that year that bringing an outsider in would. And then Getz was like, I have to do a deep dive on everything, and we're going to have to push this out for a few years and like start over. And so one of them was lying, but either way. So a lot of this is TBD. We haven't seen Getz do a draft. But he has been here for 7 years, and he was the head of player development for the 7 years before he was the GM. And we're still seeing some very significant problems with that. But I'm trying to be fair in that context as much as I can. If I had done this podcast in April 21st, 22nd instead of May, it would have been a lot meaner, because some of these players have rallied from pretty terrible starts, but a lot of them haven't. So I had initially made a preliminary list of players he had acquired, major league players Getz had acquired. So these are players that have very reliable track records, very visible track records. What I mean is, you're not projecting somebody in rookie ball, because you might acquire somebody in the low minors and it's a great idea. And even though it's a great idea, it doesn't work out. That doesn't make it a bad idea, for instance. Obviously. That's another Blue Jays home run. Neat. So Martin Maldonado is sort of the most obvious one here. I don't know if my data query is going to load in time to get the answer on just how bad he's been in a historical context. Coming into today, he was hitting 093, 150, 147. That is a 297 OPS, and he has 81 plate appearances. So not a huge sample. If he pops 10 homers in the rest of the season or something, you might claw that back to an OPS in the 500s. And that would be sort of consistent with where his career had been trending into his late 30s, because he had been clawing along at something in the low 600s, which was like bad, but you could live with it. And that's they gave Maldonado $4.5 million guaranteed. Off the top of my head, I think that's the biggest position player contract they handed out this offseason. It may be the biggest contract they handed out this offseason, period. If I'm forgetting something, forgive me. But there were other catchers available. They, oh gosh, why am I blanking his name? Gary Sanchez, for instance, is a free agent, not super expensive, I don't think, and he's playing significantly better than Maldonado. But what scares me about that signing isn't that he's bad. I think we heard what the organization thought, or at least wanted to sell us on. Starting from opening day, you could see on opening day, you could hear the announcers who have been, restaffed to be more in line with what Jerry Reinsdorf thinks is good, everybody kept saying, he's like a coach on the field. He's going to really help handle a pitching staff, prepare for a game, show everybody how to prepare for a game. His defense is just so good that you don't mind that his bat's not great. But there are so many problems with this approach. First of all, if you're basically hiring him as a coach, you don't need to plan for him to be your starting catcher. And even as Corey Lee has, to a lot of people's surprise, I think most people's surprise, hit really, really well coming into this season. That he's hit way, way, way better than anybody would have expected. He's been the second best hitter on the team, and playing a tough position. He's got his issues defensively, but this is about as good of an outcome as you can have at this position as you had coming into the year in that regard. But the plan was to have Martin Maldonado there, and I think Max Stassi was going to be the backup. I said this on the Oju podcast. I liked the Stassi acquisition. I think he's been a good player in the past. It was a creative move to give Getz credit. I thought it, somebody who hadn't played for non-baseball reasons, and not like the nightmare non-baseball reasons that we'll get to with some of these other Getz acquisitions. But Stassi, I guess, just once he showed up in spring training, he just physically was compromised in some way. We don't have a lot of details, but sadly he's unavailable. But then you have this Corey Lee surprise. Oh my God, we're in this nightmare year. There's just nothing going right. And this roster is really old. Like the roster, I'm just going to go to Baseball Reference and sort the team page by plate appearances. You have Andrew Vaughn is first on the team. He's 26. Normally in a vacuum, you'd say, hey, 26-year-old high draft pick playing a ton. This is a great year for him to do it, even if it's been awful. Then you have Benintendi, who's 29. Gavin Sheets is 28. Eloy's 27, and he's going to be gone. DeYoung is 30. Lopez is 29. And then we get all the way down to Corey Lee, who is 7th in plate appearances on the team, who is 25. Maldonado's still 10th on the team in plate appearances. He was the plan of primary catcher, and even as he's been a complete debacle, they're still playing him in a timeshare. I think one of the things that hasn't changed from Hahn to Getz is, and what scares me, because this was one of the things that really tracked with the team failing. They would build these teams they thought would compete, and then the back half of their roster, lineup spots 6 through 9, etc., wouldn't just be bad or defensive specialists. They would be the worst player in the majors at their position by a wide margin, just like complete collapse. I think of 600, this is not scientific at all, but I think of a 600 OPS as kind of a really meaningful threshold where, if you have, there's got to be somebody on the team near 600 OPS. Danny Mendick, he's at 622. It's good for an OPS plus a 75. That is obviously bad. But for a defensive specialist, a utility infielder, a catcher, that's the line for me where you're still can help the team, even if you're helping by not hurting it. But these guys are we've seen this before. I think JB Shuck is an example of that 2016 team. That was sort of the last year where before they tore everything down. But we've seen this in right field. We've seen it at second base, or sort of the famous positions for it. Getz has so far trailed Hahn in that not only are these guys he's signing or trading for, not only are they bad or defensive specialists as they're intended to be, they're awful. Like, they are so far below that number. I mean, it drives me crazy when I hear these platitudes, and I understand some of these people don't. There's nothing else you can say if you're employed by the team or you're just trying to put a rosy spin on things. But when you say, well, Maldonado's not here for his bat, there's a difference between the 600 OPS he was doing and the 300 OPS he has now. I mean, that's just, I really can't emphasize enough, just historically terrible. I think somebody pulled up the numbers in the context of Javi Baez, and I apologize, I'm not giving them proper credit recently, but Javi Baez was somewhere in the 400s, and it was rating out as one of the 25 worst hitting seasons like ever. And this is a very old sport. I think we're talking about records going back 140, 150 years at this point. And Maldonado's been significantly worse than that at the plate. I mean, it's worse than, I think it's worse than the composite line pitchers were posting before they just got rid of pitchers hitting at all as a rule of the sport. So he's still going. I mean, he hasn't, I don't know. I'm just going through like the coach on a field line. I don't know why it's good to have him on the field. I don't know why, if he wants to be a coach, just put him in the dugout. Make him your emergency catcher if you need to, I guess, like if you can make your roster work that way. But I just don't know how you can play him. I don't know how you can look the other people in the dugout in the face and say, yeah, like we're taking this, even we're even trying to be credible or serious at all. I think it's insulting. I think it's insulting to tell the fans, oh no, his other contributions are so good, because the other problem, and this data may be out of date, but I doubt it. If it's maybe in the specifics, but not directionally, certainly. But when I was first putting this outline together, Maldonado was already dead last in Baseball Prospectus composite catcher defense metric, CDA, which includes framing, includes blocking, holding runners, all those things. He was visibly boxing pitches. He had been dead last in 2023 in that number too, among qualified catchers. So he had visibly collapsed. A much smarter organization, the Astros, who had put up with him for a long time and knew him better than anybody, said, yeah, he's done. We can't do this anymore. And the White Sox came in over the top and gave him they made him their most expensive acquisition this winter. Not saying much. I don't know who they were bidding against. I don't know who else was even offering him a major league contract. He was the worst player in the majors last year. He is not helping the pitchers. He's putting them in bad counts, which you look at, go to Baseball Reference and just start poking around, or Fangraphs, and start poking around how the league does hitting with two strikes versus without. And that'll give you an idea of how important some of the framing is. I mean, we can look at framing runs, and that's sort of an abstract concept, but just the difference between a 2-1 count and a 1-2 count. And think of every time he's doing that to one of his pitchers. And he's doing it a lot. We saw it immediately. He's can't frame anymore. He kind of can't block very well, I don't think, anymore either. So it's not the money, it's not the damage to the season, it's more what this represents to me of like, what does Getz think he's doing? They've said, oh, he's going to handle the young pitching staff. The pitching staff is not young. These guys are old. Just so far, we've had a couple of starts from guys like Nastrini and Cannon, but like a handful, like 4 or 5. In terms of innings on the team, just sorting by innings, nothing fancy. Fetty's 31, Crochet's 25, but I think his best outing of the year, Corey Lee was catching for him, so take what you want from that. Soroka's 26, but he's been around for a long time, and he's pretty obviously just physically can't do it anymore. Chris Flexen is 29. Kopech is now a reliever. He's 28. Tanner Banks is 32. Steve Wilson's 29. Jordan Leisure is 25. Even though he's a rookie, he's a 25-year-old relief prospect. Schuster's 25. Brad Keller, who they just cut, is 28. Tim Hill's 34. These guys, this is a very, Mike Clevenger's 33. This is a very, very old pitching staff. Certainly, if you're going to say, oh, these guys are so confused and vulnerable and they're going to need Maldonado to keep them calm. I don't know what your manager's doing. I don't know what your bench coach is doing. I don't know what your catching coach is doing. If you think that you need Maldonado to get those guys to where they can function and still develop without compromising them, because boxing pitches and losing strikes and making sure you're always losing because you're 0 for 50 at any given time, that's like, I can measure that. And Maldonado may be great at all those things, but if you don't have a coaching staff who's also who can replicate those types of things, that's a lot easier to fix. That's like, a bullpen coach, catcher, or whatever, just doesn't cost $4+ million. So I think it's just emblematic of just a complete disaster, bad idea going about as badly as it possibly can. And that kind of touches on something that happened, that just happened right before I decided to just pull the trigger and hop on and record something, even if it's just me monologuing into a camera for half an hour, however long this winds up being, is John Schifrin, the, I guess, embattled play-by-play announcer. I don't, I think he's pretty straightforward for what he is. He's a very enthusiastic play-by-play guy who is clearly has his predecessor was the best at the job, and he lost the job because the owner didn't like him. So Schifrin has pretty clearly got his priority is make sure your boss likes the work you're doing, which leads to just sort of blind optimism, which, you look, if I were doing play-by-play in this, nobody would want to hear it because I would just be being, oh, here's Nicky Lopez up again. Jesus Christ, can you believe he's still here? Sort of thing. But I think even though he's been sort of chastised a bit lately about being too goofy and over the top with his enthusiasm, he said that he was talking about the rough start and how they've had a churn of bringing new guys in since then to try to make things better. And he cited Tommy Pham, which this is something that Getz has done better than Rick Hahn did. I've talked about this a million times, but it's just, it was so strange to me to watch those teams he built that were trying to win just have a black hole at a position and have him try nothing, just try no waiver acquisitions, no like double A prospect for double A prospect trades, like just nothing. Getz has been churning some of the back end roster. I mean, even heading into spring training, where's this list I drew up? But guys like, just off the top of my head, like Grossman, Pilar, Moustakis. He brought in Tommy Pham, obviously. He brought in Julks. He brought in Deloach. He's just like throwing volume at it. There are less charitable ways of describing it, but I always approve trying to do something instead of just doing nothing, even if it's unlikely to solve a problem. If you just always are trying to make things a little bit better, that adds up over time. If you're always trying to add more talent than you're losing, that adds up over time. And those are two things the White Sox never did under Rick Hahn. Just didn't do it. So Tommy Pham was a great signing. Don't know why he was available for the White Sox to sign as opposed to some contender. He's older, but he clearly played well in the playoffs. He was an above average major leaguer last year, or at least a credible starting player, certainly a very good bench player. So, okay, take advantage of it. Great, be opportunistic, something the White Sox never were. And he's been awesome. And hopefully they'll trade him for something good and he'll go somewhere and do well for some playoff contender. But the thing that Schifrin cited as the reason they improved is that it was his attitude and how he got ready for work every day and his professionalism, how he prepared. And I'm not saying that's not important. But like, I think the constant, I'm just going to call it lying. I think that just lying to our faces and sort of the propaganda and the sort of self-congratulatory speak it into existence thing, it doesn't hold up because much like Rick Hahn promising us there, oh, well, talk to me after the parade. And yeah, sure, you think I'm an idiot now, but wait till you see what I put together. It's like, you realize we don't vanish when you say that. You're buying time, you're stalling. But then, like, reality happens and we can test what you said against what actually happened. And so, I mean, they spent this entire offseason talking about culture and hustle and professionalism and attitude, and they brought in all these old players from other organizations. Great. Um, Telling us that they were going to fix the culture first. And I don't know why you're telling me that, despite putting together this roster that by all accounts worked really hard, and it is a testament to the guys who were there, that their morale, that when they were 3-22 and the lap, like a joke, and getting their heads kicked in every night, that they kept showing up and kept trying, and you know, they managed to. Their record is going to wind up being unremarkable, I think. The, you know, generic last year division record instead of historical, like, punchline, like the 03 Tigers or whatever that Baltimore team was, or the, which Mets team was it? 63? Who knows? But like, credit to those guys as people and as professionals. But that, so, but then you're here telling me that Tommy Pham's work ethic or preparation is what helped. And I mean, the reason Tommy Pham helped is because this team is the worst hitting team in baseball, one of the worst hitting teams of all time. And, like, realistically, given the modern context and stuff like that, Tommy Pham's OPS plus coming today was 144. You dropped a free, like, I'm not saying he's gonna hit like this forever. You dropped a free all-star caliber performance into a roster that had, like, sub replacement hitters in it. That's what helped. You started scoring like 3 to 5 runs a game instead of 0 to 1. You were getting shut out like a third of the time. Like, that's why, like, I don't know why you need it to be some sort of moral judgment or some sort of personality. Like, this isn't English class. This isn't, these guys aren't metaphors. Like, Tommy Pham helped because he's a good hitter. He might be a good hitter in large part because of his processes and how he approaches things. But, like, are you telling me that all the stuff you did this offseason to improve the culture and the process and preparation and systems and information and all this stuff that you were going to overhaul and fix, that if some team, if like the Mets had just brought Tommy Pham back, you would have been, you would have had nothing? You wouldn't have had enough, because, like, what you did assemble before Pham got here was 3-22. Like, which is it? Are you, like, you know what I mean? This is why I call it a lie, because either you lied to me then and you lied to me, you're lying to me now. Now, granted, Schifrin's not in the front office, but I think it's fair to surmise that he's a mouthpiece for what the organization wants us to hear. I think that's a fair supposition. But just like, I don't know. I've already been ranting, but like Nicky Lopez is another one where you went out and targeted this guy. You traded a piece that a good team had interest in, and you mostly just jumped the queue on waivers to grab all the guys who weren't going to make the Braves 40-man. Credit for volume, I guess. Like I said, take a lot of shots. Like, part of that philosophy I kind of like, but I'm worried about Getz' ability to identify talent and where players are at, which is sort of the core issue of all of this. Nicky Lopez is another one of these guys. It's not as bad as Maldonado because he's still decent defensively. I don't think he's where he used to be, but his OPS is below 500 coming in. He's not hitting the 600 threshold that I was talking about. So that's another guy where he's got 100. He's top 6 on the team. Plate appearances, very close to being tied for 4th and most plate appearances in the team. He is absolutely one of the worst hitters in baseball. He's probably the worst hitting full-time second baseman in baseball, and it might be by a lot. I could probably check it. Maybe there's some other teams who are like hopeless who are also doing that. But even, but like, that's another example where you knew this position was a problem. It doesn't really seem like they have anything in the minors to address it, unless I'm forgetting somebody. I might be forgetting somebody, but you already let Jose Rodriguez walk. I don't think Jose Rodriguez is great. Do I think he could get an OPS over 500? Maybe. Do I think? I mean, Lenine Sosa. Everyone hates him. They all think he sucks. He was making some of the most glaring, just like can't do rundowns, doesn't know where to throw the ball, just sort of knucklehead stuff out there. But Lenine Sosa's tenure with like entire professional baseball career, I think going back to being a teenager when he signed with, I mean, this is, I'm assuming, forgive me if I'm getting these details wrong. I think he overlaps entirely with Chris Getz as the head of player development. So it's like Lenny Sosa should be 100% a product of Chris Getz's player development. But you can't even get him on the field or on the roster over Nicky Lopez, who is having, like, again, a catastrophically bad season because he's not ready. He like I know quad A players exist. Quad A player, and we joke about this, but like quad A players, like, oh, they're too good for AAA, but they're not good enough for the majors. But like even quad A players will usually get over that like 600 OPS line. You know what I'm talking about? Like we can say, oh, like quad A players, like yeah, they're not going to be the like stars that they were in AAA, but like a lot of those guys can like muddle through and be replacement level. To be honest with you, so that's those are two guys who concern the hell out of me. I haven't even gotten to Mike Clevenger yet, which I was livid when they signed him last year. When they brought him in, they could claim they didn't know about the domestic violence accusation that was being investigated by the league, and because of the league's process, they keep that confidential from the teams. And the I'm almost embarrassed that I saved this for last, but I also honestly I just don't like thinking about it, which is a luxury that I have. Um, Hahn had the gall to say it was like a calculated risk based on his immaturity, because even without knowing about that DV investigation, anybody who was on baseball Twitter had seen like 5 years ago that he had been accused by one of his many romantic partners of like throwing her and their two young kids out of their house without a word, like ghosting her, ghosting his kids. He had already been traded from a content, like being, when he was good, he was basically dumped by the Indians at the time, the Guardians now, um, for just being a miserable teammate that everybody hated because he flouted the COVID regulations and then lied to his team about it. Like this is a this is not a, if you're going to talk about culture and team and building like attitude and atmosphere above winning, do that first. I don't know how you can justify bringing this guy in, but then a year later, after another year of all this like culture nonsense that you've been beating a drum about, you sign him again. This time you did know. And you have your idiot manager out there saying, going out of his way, he's given so many quotes to not just say, because like if you're the manager in that position and the front says like, you know what, we're going to be really cynical, we're just going to sign this guy because either we're terrified that this roster we put together is going to lose 140 games and we're just going to be remembered as like a punchline, or B, we think we can trade him for something, which anybody could have signed him. He signed for like what, $3 million. Any team could have had him. They all decided he was both too bad and not worth the headache and not worth the horrible PR message you're sending to anybody who cares about this stuff. Anybody who cares about not like abusing his kids, which depending on, like this isn't like ironclad evidence or whatever. It isn't like a signed confession or something like that, but there's indications that he's still misbehaving towards his current and former romantic partners. The fact that he went out to Gold Digger as his entrance song last year with the White Sox, like showed a lot of sort of, I don't know, rubbing people's faces in it, feeling really this like sneering, sadistic quality to it. So that's still going on. You brought him in, even though, like, look, the team's bad, but you have bulk arms. Like, you can just, it's not like you need to cover those innings. You have guys who can also, it's not like he's good. He sucks. Like, you can have anybody. Nobody's going to trade for this guy. There's no cynical baseball reason to do it. And there's certainly no case for it in terms of, like, with a straight face. But anyway, you've got Grifol. Like, if you've been saddled with this, he could just say, well, he pitched well for us last year, and he didn't cause any problems in the clubhouse. So, like, he's here, and we hope he does well. Like, you don't need to. But Grafal, go look at his quotes. He goes out of his way to be like, he was an awesome teammate. We love having him here. He's like a great guy. Which, like, he's done it enough. It's very possible that Grafal is just like one of the dumbest guys you'll ever meet, and that's why this sort of thing comes out of his mouth. But I think there is smoke. I don't know if there's fire yet, but there's smoke that between Grafal, some of Dayton Moore's stuff about trying to sign Luke Heimlich back in the day. Um, he signed Brad Keller, who, like, not the same issues as Clevenger, don't get me wrong, but like very weird fight with Tim Anderson, which gave me, raised my eyebrows. I apologize for that, like, quick segue, because like I would say this to Brad Keller's face. I'm like, not even close to the same galaxy as this like Clevenger, like, awful stuff. But Omar Vizquel and Wes Helms, Vizquel much more well known publicly than whatever Wes Helms was doing. I think those were both Getz guys. Those were minor league managers, and Getz, just like Grafal is saying that Clevenger is not only just here and we're got a job to do, but that Clevenger is a great guy and a great guy to be around. Getz had nice things to say about Vizquel, even as he was drummed out of baseball for being a serial abuser and creep. So my antenna are up for that. If that being something that's going on with Getz, that he's maybe being a scummy person is like a mark in your favor. But yeah, Nicky Lopez is washed. Soroka, look, I get it. I understand that, but that's just not working at all. Braden Shoemake's another guy where you could say, yeah, he's a glove first, whatever player they're going to take a shot on, but it's another Getz acquisition where he can't even get within shouting distance of being the worst bat you could play with his glove. That's not working at all. The Flexen signings worked out fine, I think. I mean, he's muddling through. Don't hate it. You needed somebody to pitch these innings. And hey, as far as I know, Flexen's never been in danger of being suspended for abusing a romantic partner. Eric Fetty signing has been absolutely fantastic. Loved the idea from the beginning. Process was great. He's been awesome. I think it's really creative. It shows that when you spend a little bit more money and you do it wisely, hey, you can actually get a much better player than this other garbage they've been fighting through. Benintendi and Fletcher are here. Fletcher is somebody that Getz one out of his way to acquire. Traded a decent prospect for him. And I understood the idea and I liked it. I thought he was sort of a second division starter type, on base guy, can field his position in the outfield, and can maybe hit a little bit. We haven't seen that in ages. Ironically, like, the projection for him would be maybe what Benintendi was supposed to be for this team. But now we're back to our, idiot manager and weird front office where Fletcher struggled out of the gate. Hardly worse than, he struggled, but like hardly worse than, Shoemaker, some of these other guys did, or certainly worse than Maldonado did. But he got sent down, didn't really hit great in Charlotte, and then got brought back up because Rafael Ortega was also terrible. But now he's being benched for Andrew Benintendi, who plays every single game, no matter what. And Grafal entered this series and described Benintendi as a pillar in the center of their lineup. Benintendi, I think, I can check. I think he dipped below. He's 0 for 4. He dipped below a 500 OPS today, I think, or close to it. Benintendi's been terrible in left field, and not just in the like, he couldn't make a diving catch sort of thing, but we know his arm is absolutely terrible. I wonder if I could pause this. All right, sorry about that. I'll do my best about stitching that back together. We're talking about Andrew Benintendi. He's been missing the cutoff man. He's been just airmailing throws with the worst arm you've ever seen. He's been showing minimal effort in fielding his position. Really, like, if you actually were honest, this is why I call them liars again. If you were honest about the culture, hustle, defense, professionalism, He's not really been, leading by example on that front. You talk about accountability. I complained about this on the Oju show. They couldn't stop talking about accountability. Fans, media, especially the team media, get the NBC guys. Accountability, accountability. They never say what they mean. They never say what they mean. Whether it means being screamed at, benched, cut, fined, whatever. They never say what they mean. They just want accountability because that'll fix it. That'll make all these guys who are, by all accounts, we were told, no group has ever worked harder or liked each other better or tried more, but they're still absolutely abominable at baseball. So, where's the accountability for Benintendi? Like, what is it? I mean, frankly, like they should just cut him. I have no idea why he's still here. I think he's clearly just physically can't do it anymore. I don't think he can do it anymore. I don't think he can hit major league pitching anymore, like at all. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe but I don't know how you don't give him a week off or a day off. Even like he's just playing every single day, and I guess they're going to ride out 3 more years of this. It's pretty hard to fathom, but I don't know how you acquire a 25, 26-year-old guy with major league experience in Fletcher, and you're in this season, and Benintendi's playing this badly, and Fletcher still can't get plate appearances. Like I don't. Either you screwed up then, or you're screwing up now. It can't. It has to be one of the two. DeYoung's been great for all these major league acquisitions, like for the price and what you needed him to be. He's been great. Strikeout to walk ratio is like 10, but whatever. The relievers, it's a bunch of old guys who are on like 1-year deals. Most of them are terrible. Tim Hill's awful. Dominic Leone's awful. Brebbia seems pretty good. Steven Wilson seems pretty good. Although you traded Dylan Cease for him, so I'd hope he'd be pretty good. So yeah, I think they've put together good organizational health on pitching, and I think they put together good organizational health at catcher. Even though like Martin Meldona's at the head of that, I think like between Caro and some of these other guys I'm blanking on in the minors and Corey Lee, seems like they're in pretty good shape. But there are some real systemic red flags here. Some really important players aren't getting better at all. Andrew Vaughn is I don't know how you broke this player this badly from, by all accounts, what he was coming into professional baseball. Yeah, I mean, we're still hearing things about effort and IQ and the right leaders and things like that, and it's just the biggest one of the biggest problems with this organization is they do not know how to make hitters better. They do not know how to identify people who can hit or will hit moving forward. They just have no idea. And what's scary is there isn't much in the minors by way of bats. Brian Ramos came up and Grifol immediately threw him under the bus for what he said was a mistake, even though because Grifol is like pretty much like he's like a cartoon of the like kissing up and upwards at like people who he thinks have more stature than him, and then just punching down as hard as he can. Rookies, they just get destroyed by him and to the media, like humiliating publicly. But then Benintendi's a pillar, and Clevenger is a great teammate. Just like two options here: either he believes it and he's the dumbest guy who's ever lived, or he's the biggest liar on the planet. Neither of them's a good look. So I don't know. I think I don't really know where they're going to improve the team's offense, but looking at like the many moves Getz has made, there are some winners in here. Some of them are creative, like good creative winners, like like legitimately good for him. Some of these are failed in such obvious fashion that I don't know. It really scares me about his ability to evaluate players. And also, the defense is terrible. They said that was all they were going to try to make good this year, basically, and they couldn't do it. So, and I talked about this again. I won't repeat myself, but I don't know where they're going to find enough bats in the future. I don't know who's supposed to hit for this team. Even if every prospect like works out to their reasonable upside, you still are going to need to fill at least 3 or 4 spots on the lineup. And I don't think you're doing it in free agency. Haven't seen a lot of ability to do it in trades. So I don't know. We'll see, and we'll see if I can stitch together these two segments of this episode. Thanks for listening to me like talk at you like it's a Zoom meeting or something. Um, but yeah, it's about the quarter mark, and I'm willing to give Getz more time. I tried to look at these things that are, like I said, more indicative of process problems. Jacob Gonzalez might have cleaned up his swing. If they took a bad first round pick from last year and cleaned him up in the minors, that would be one of the biggest things they could possibly do to make me think they might actually know what they're doing and might actually win more than half their games before I turn 40 at some point, which is in like 4 years. So thanks for bearing with me, everybody. And I'll talk to you soon, hopefully.